Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Israel never had any designs against Iran. The two nations are neither neighbors with competing claims nor natural rivals as regional powers. The Persians, along with the Azeri minority and other communities, are Muslims but not Arabs. For several decades, when Shah Mohammed Reza Pahlavi ruled Iran, Tehran and Jerusalem were de facto members of the same pro-Western alliance. It was only when the Ayatollahs toppled the Shah and the regime became fanatically Islamic that Iran started to wage war against Israel. Now, after 45 years of shadows and proxies, this war is out in the open. What is its current stage and what can we expect next? With us to decipher it are all the way from Washington, D.C., retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, who formerly served as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General.
Jonathan.
Also joining us from elsewhere here in Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Cooperwasser, who is a Project Director in Middle East Developments at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, who formerly served as the Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs, and also the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessments Head. It's good to see you, General.
Good to be with you.
It's a pleasure indeed. With me, actually, across the pond at this moment in time, nonetheless, still with me here in spirit is Mr. Amir Oren, TV7 Editor-at-Large. It's good to see you, Amir. Take it away.
Well, you know, it's very rare in international relations when warnings which have been sounded for so long finally come true. And Iran, rather than always hiding behind its proxies, now comes out into the open and is confronting Israel head on. We first heard about it last April, in mid-April, when Iran tried an offensive, 300 or so projectiles launched at Israel. And now, once again, in early July, Iran is threatening and may be in the process of making good, or making bad in this case, on its threat to hit Israel. And Iran, of course, is being helped by Hezbollah, by Hamas, by the Houthis, by pro-Iranian Shiite militias in Iraq. They also, of course, are based inside Syria. And perhaps most ominously, from the Israeli point of view, Iran is now being backed by Russia. Russia is supposedly not hostile towards Israel, but the very fact that it has this relationship with Iran, that it is indebted to Iran because of the Iranian help in the Ukrainian war, and the fact that Russia is present in Syria, which of course limits the Israeli freedom of aerial movement, all of this puts Israel in a very challenging strategic environment.
General Kimmett, I'd like to refer the first question to you, since from an Iranian perspective, the two key principles, even though I think we can highlight three, are first and foremost to export the revolution within that context, and then the two main foreign policy that have been issues that have been articulated by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is deepening Iran's relations with its neighbors. Of course, the relations is a strong word for what it ultimately aspires to see in those neighbors, but that's a different story. And then the third one is to oust the United States from the region, since it views America as the greatest threat to the Ayatollah regime, and therefore, when confronting Israel, do they see Israel as the extension of the United States in the region? And if so, to what degree is this, from an American perspective, a challenge to its hegemony at large, as well as its presence in the region?
Well, Jonathan, I think you've answered your own question. It is clear that Iran sees the United States as themselves in the sense of running proxy operations. For Iran, they have their axes of resistance that they use the Hezbollah, they use the Houthis, they use Hamas, the Hashid inside of Iraq. And they see the Americans doing the same thing with its proxies, whether it's Ukraine fighting the Russians, whether it's Israel fighting Iran, whether it's the United States now using its proxies such as Australia, Japan, and Korea to fight the Chinese. So I think there's a little bit of mirror imaging that goes on here as the Iranians see the position of the Americans.
General Cooper-Vassell, one thing I take out from what just General Kimmett mentioned, and that is, at what level did the Iranians delude themselves or put themselves in some sort of dream that they can identify their prowess and power in par with that of the United States?
Well, I don't think that the Iranians believe that they are a power to the United States with their forces and capabilities. They realize that they are not there. The long-term goal of Iran is really to be at the same place of the United States and be a superpower, and that's one of the reasons why they're trying to arm themselves with nuclear capabilities and have influence all around the world. But they know that for the time being, this is not the case. They have still to work a lot in order to reach that position. What they focus on right now is to dominate the Middle East. That's the immediate goal. And from there, they will move on for the rest of the world. And in the Middle East, they face not only the United States, but also Israel as a regional superpower. And they are trying to put a lot of pressure on Israel and make it disappear eventually. So they will be able to dominate the region and then deal with the United States. That's the gradual stage-by-stage plan that they have. And I think that what we are witnessing now is that they believed that one step of this gradual plan has come to fruition, and they can challenge Israel and put it in a way that Israel will feel so weak that they will be able to really convince Saudis, Bahrainis, Emiratis, Egyptians, Jordanians, that it was a wrong move to deal with to establish a relationship with Israel, and that they should come back to the loving hands of Iran. And they were doing quite well to some extent in recent years in this respect. And what happened on the 7th of October and what happened on the 8th of October and on the 17th of October was all proofs of, the intervention of Hezbollah and of the Houthis later on after Hamas was proof that this is working. We are still in the midst of the war that will define whether this assumption of the Iranians was correct or not. Definitely, Israel responded in a very fearful manner, and after the first shock, was able to regroup and launch a war against Hamas in Gaza and deal with Hezbollah in the north and harm the Houthis in Yemen, and even do all kinds of things that were painful for the Iranians in Iran. Well, it didn't take responsibility for them, but everybody believes that this was done by Israel. So Israel was able also to eliminate some of the key Iranian figures in Syria and hit some targets in Iran in a way that is remains unclear who actually did it, and to some extent. And that's something that is very problematic for the Iranians, and that's why they are so committed now to do something painful to Israel. They believe that they cannot come out of this situation without charging Israel with a heavy price. And that's what they're saying. It's not about the size of the attack. It can be a small size. It can be a bigger size. It has to be something that would be painful for Israel. That's what we should expect an attempt of the Iranians to do, together with Hezbollah, together with the Houthis, together with the Palestinians that are trying to convince them to do their part as well.
Mr. Oren, I'd like to hear your perspective on this as well, since when we're looking at the Iranian efforts, right now is not the timing from their perspective. They would have much rather maintained a low intensity war against Israel, a war of attrition that has been working for them for the past 10 months roughly. Why alter the equation now, in addition, of course, to the points made by General Kupilvasa?
Well, from their perspective, there is indeed no reason to change their long held positions, but Israel forced their hands. Now, we have to admit that there are two competing narratives here. Our own narrative, as the victims of the October 7 massacre and our just war against Hamas, is that every Hamas asset and leader is a justified target. And Ismail Haniyeh, who, by the way, along with Mohammed Def and Yahya Sinwar, has been one of the subjects of prosecutor Karim Khan's recommendation for an arrest warrant as a war criminal, was certainly a justified target. The problem is that Israel combined its war against Hamas with its conflict against Iran or with Iran by taking out Haniyeh in Tehran in such a manner that it could have been analyzed, and I'm sure had Yossi Kupperwasser still been in his position as the most senior Israeli in charge of assessment, he would have said it to begin with, that this was to be expected, that killing a guest of the regime in the official guest house in Tehran, right after the inauguration of the new president, when he's hosted by Khamenei, that this was sure to bring about retaliation. This was not something which could have been swept under the Persian rug. So, according to this narrative, Israel either lacked in judgment or, more ominously, wanted Iran to respond so as to further escalate and finally get to the Iranian nuclear infrastructure.
Sun Tzu said in his book that the art of war is the art of deception, and by doing so, the various activities are obviously part of one strategy or another. We need to identify which one we're deliberating right now. But I'd like to ask you, General Kimmett, about Washington's approach. On the one hand, you have the conservative camp that calls for establishing friction, to put their foot down and saying, Iran, that's enough. If you don't, if you continue with your activities, you will face the wrath of the United States, expecting such a move to alleviate some of Tehran's military adventurism. But on the other hand, there is the more progressive perspective, which seeks to say, Iran, you're part of this region. We accept that, and we would like to engage with you in diplomacy to alleviate those activities that you're pursuing right now, and to try and convince you why that is a better approach. Is this, though, let's put this first, the latter is the one that is pursued by the current administration in Washington. But with that brought into context, at what point does the current administration, albeit in a presidential race to seize yet again the seat of power in Washington, D.C., alter its policy in order to confront something that is now in a much more crucial point in time?
Well, Jonathan, I think you've got to separate the long-term policy from the near-term crisis situation. You characterize the long-term policy quite well. Obviously, the left would like to negotiate. The right would like to be a little stronger than just giving away pallets of cash. But in the near term, in this particular crisis that we're going through right now, I think rather than this being a focus of left-right, it's more a focus of flanks versus the middles. There is tremendous bipartisan support to respond to any attack on Israel by Iran, and strong bipartisan support that we would be consequential to the support. On the flanks, it's not the case. The progressives on the far left certainly don't want to support Israel for all the reasons that we've seen over the last few months. And on the far right, even on the far right, there's a real question about getting involved in another foreign entanglement in the near term. But I think right now the center will hold during this crisis situation. But in the long term, particularly under a Harris administration, if that comes about, I think you're going to see more of a left-right split in terms of how the policy is developed to confront a continuing and expanding Iranian threat.
Just to think that all of the various unfortunate shifts in the stock market yesterday may have significantly diminished even more, or become the plummet would have been a lot bigger if an Iranian attack would have taken place. And that is a reminder that foreign policy has direct influence over domestic affairs. But General Kupilvasa, I'd like to ask you also, when speaking about what Mr. Oren mentioned, Israel calculated every one of its moves, be it the strike in Beirut or the alleged attack that brought about the demise of Hamas's political leader. And if Israel were indeed behind that attack, no Israeli official has yet claimed responsibility for this assassination or targeted killing. Nonetheless, it would initially, if Iran were to attack Israel and bring about a certain devastating outcome, it would provide Israel the legitimacy necessary to wipe out Hezbollah, were it in the position to do so. Is that something that the Iranians are also taking into the equation?
I don't think it's a big question of legitimacy here, because we were attacked. This is the strategic framework, is that we were attacked on 7th of October, and then again by Hezbollah and by the Houthis, all orchestrated by Iran. So we were attacked by Iran with its proxies. That's the situation. It's not a matter of legitimacy. It's a matter of political support for such moves. And as General Kimmich said, I think I fully agree with him, the vast majority of the Americans are ready to help Israel protect itself because it was attacked originally, and they don't want to see Israel suffering. But at the same time, I don't think that any of them support an Israeli offensive. And if we go for the offensive, we should be more or less alone. That's why many in Israel raised the option of taking the first move in this situation, not waiting for the Iranians to hit us. But I don't think that this is going to be possible, because we don't have enough international support for such a move. Here too, even if we're talking about the reaction to an Iranian imminent attack, it's going to be more problematic than what Amir described. We can do that, but we need, in order to be successful in an attack against the Iranian nuclear facilities, the American support. And I don't think that we are going to get it. We stand now with this administration, and maybe not even with the next administration. And whatever administration is going to be, we are not going to stand to have this support. And this is a problem. Only if the Iranians move on the nuclear realm, then there's going to be support for taking the Iranian nuclear facilities. It doesn't mean that Israel is not going to do that, but we have to realize this is not going to be done with American support at this point. What can be done is all kinds of less impressive measures against the Iranians. We have a wide variety of options, and much depends now on what's going to happen once Iran attacks. If the Iranians and the Hezbollah attack is going to be limited, and they're not going to have any successes to show for, then the Israeli retaliation should be probably expected to be limited. But if the Iranians and the Hezbollah manage to inflict heavy damage on Israel, then it's a different story, because we have already showed restraint in mid-April when we were attacked, and responded with something that was mainly symbolic. But this time around, I don't think this is going to be sufficient, and we shall need to do something bigger if the attack is going to cost us a heavy price. And that's where the chances for wide-scale escalation lie. And all the efforts of the United States to avoid it may fail if Israel is not well protected. And then, so we can expect a full support from the Americans to protect Israel from the incoming attack. But if we are not successful, then the results are obvious. If we are successful, by the way, this is going to be a heavy frustration, a deep frustration for the Iranians, because they cannot afford to twice try to hit Israel with a lot of projectiles and put all their assets on the table and not achieve anything. That is too harmful for the Iranian regime, especially when it happens after Hania was killed in their when he was their guest, as Amir described it very precisely. And I think this is something that the Iranians cannot afford suffering. They have to do. That's I think the reason why they wait so long. They want to come up with something that's going to be successful. They cannot afford another 14th of April. This is unacceptable for the Iranians.
And yet, in two conversations I had with senior American officials, including one currently in Washington and one who is currently also visiting Israel as part of the military, they both highlighted that Iran may be wary of its own success because it knows that if it will succeed beyond expectation, the United States will stand by Israel in responding to such an attack, in the hope that that would also somehow constrain full-scale military conflagration. Mr. Oren, what could you provide us with in that context?
Well, as we all remember, 110 years ago, this summer, the First World War erupted. What we are having now in the Middle East is the last world war, because it's just like in a fight between two mafia families or hamulas in the criminal sector in Israel, where they settle accounts. And it's never over until someone says the last word. What that also means is that if the account to be settled now seems to be that Israel is in debt to Iran, then Iran may exact some diplomatic price for not settling the account. If it is shrewd enough, if it wants something in particular, perhaps in the nuclear field, then it can come as the aggrieved party to the United States in some back channel and ask for some favor. But whether the presidential election season is the right time for it is quite doubtful.
And it also depends, of course, at who sits at the helm. We're drawing near to the end of the program, and I'd like to give each and every one of you the opportunity to provide somewhat of an analysis for the next week. What are we to expect? Of course, there's a lot of speculation due to the expected strike emanating out of the Islamic Republic of Iran. General Kimmett, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would just make one point about the election season. It is consequential that Biden is not running for a second term. That gives him the freedom to do what he wants without having to worry about the impact on a re-election campaign. So I think that actually is to the advantage of Israel. He would be more concerned about his legacy than his re-election. So I think Israel should be a little bit more assured that they will get the response that they want out of the Americans when you have a lame duck president rather than one trying to get elected for a second term.
General Cooper-Vassell?
Well, I think that I agree with the analysis of General Kimmich, but I would say that from an Iranian point of view, it's a very complicated situation as you described it and correctly. On the one hand, if they're successful, it means that Israel is going to retaliate heavily and they're going to suffer the capabilities of Israel, and maybe even with the support of the United States, which is a very dangerous situation. If they are not successful, it's also something very problematic. So they have to find a way that when they are successful enough in order to say at home that we are strong and we are able to face such challenges, but at the same time, not too much successful, so that all the power of Israel and the United States is going to be directed towards them. That's a very complicated situation.
As we say in Hebrew, ben apatish lasadan. In English, it's semi-translated into between the rock and the hard place. Mr. Oren, the last minute is yours.
Just building on what General Kimmett described as Biden's options, we are still operating under his don't doctrine of early October. And that don't was directed at both Iran and Israel. Don't try to exploit the situation that was opened by Hamas in order to advance your own parochial interests. Obviously, it was meant against or at Iran and Hezbollah, first and foremost, but also as a hint to Netanyahu to be restrained. And we are still there.
As senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, Mike Duran always says, it's a bear hug. But with that, I will bring today's panel to a close. I'd like to thank General Mark Kimmett, General Yossi Kuperwasser, and Mr. Amir Oren for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition of Jerusalem Studio from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Oren. I used to be Deputy National Security Advisor to the Government of Israel, currently Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a think tank, and the editor of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. For the last few years, I've been a regular panelist for TV7, a fantastic opportunity to bring deep and analytical perspectives to the debate over regional affairs, Israeli affairs, international affairs, in the company of some of the best minds in Israel.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.